All right, so today we're going to be talking about, well, basically chapter 1 through 2. It's really chapter 2, but it's the W's. As I mentioned before, this video recording, along with these lecture notes that I'm writing, are will be posted into Google Classroom later today. Sometimes I have time during the day to be able to upload and make sure everything is uploaded in its correct locations. So you'll get a little early. But like I said, around 4 o'clock is typically what the expectation is. So stats. Like I said, a lot of it feels like almost like an ELA class in terms of the amount of reading. A lot of it will feel like a science class because you're really just you're talking about certain issues that really don't involve, that at least don't feel like they involve a lot of math. But this is what the real math is, and this is in reality probably the most important course that you can take and learn that will help you in college. Um, the most important in college, I would say, stats. To get to college is often calculus. The most important course in life, I usually say, is financial literacy. So I like to say I teach the three most important courses. The most important course that's going to help you in life with financial literacy, the most important course that's going to get you to college of your dreams, AP Calculus, and of course the course that will help you, because most 80% of college majors now require some type of statistics course. Stats is all about what are the three most important things in stats? Does anybody remember from the reading? I'll give you the first one. Context. What are the other two? Context. You want to give me the third one? Context. Yeah, the think, show, tell is what we do when we solve a problem and how our thinking process goes. But the three most important things about stats is context. Context. Without context, statistics and math really are not meaningful. As you're hearing a lot of what's going on right now with studies, with vaccinations, with deaths and infection rates. A lot of those is what the key things that there's a lot of key information that is missing in regards to context. They're selectively only telling you parts of the information because it makes it look like it's correct. If you understand statistics, you should be always asking, well, what is the context? And more importantly, we want to answer about the W's. The W's are what is our context, which is who was this data, this statistics about, what actually was utilized, what is the variable, where does this occur? Does it apply to some place that I live or in terms of how I am? When? Sometimes you see data from studies that are like back in the 1800s, okay? And you're like, well, life was a lot different back then. Sports, they always say you can't make comparisons back then. And why? Why is a very big one because, people have agendas. People want the numbers to look good. There's a lot of, for example, the vaccinations, they were saying like all 20 people who didn't die from the trial recovered. And you're like, well, wait a minute. So they had a very big thing. Everybody, but they say that and they'll say it in very small subtext, and of the people who didn't die, of the people who didn't leave the study, and you find out that there was like 30 people, and of those the other 10, 5 of them died, but they didn't include them in their numbers. And this is something that people do. And there's actually a fifth one. I know you're like, what? There's a fifth. There's the W's. It's not the 5 W's. How? How did they collect this data? And this is what a lot that you hear from like Fauci and statisticians. They're asking how. How was this a double-blind experiment, for example? Did they, how were the treatments administered? There's a lot of these types of questions of the how. Data, or data, however you want to say it, is not singular. Data is plural. And that has a lot of significance. One instance of a person happening does not make it fact. And actually, even if you have multiple people, you have multiple pieces, that also doesn't make anything a fact. We'll talk about how you do proofs and when you can say something proves something, but most importantly, there's always that one person. There could be one output, could be an outlier. So we always need multiple pieces of information. So and so didn't study and they got an A, so that means I don't need to study. No, there's evidence that proves that I don't need to study. That is not, data is not singular. Data is actually a plural. The singular word for singular data is datum, D-A-T-U-M. But when we utilize data, we always need more than one, first and foremost. And the more we have, the more information and the better choices we can get. So as I was saying, data needs context. Think of this as whenever you write some information about data, okay, every single time, you must include the following. There are two of the W's that we must always, no matter what, must be included. If we don't have these two W's, then we have nothing. Now, of course, if we're missing some of the other W's, we better be asking more information about those. And sometimes reports will leave them off. But what are the two W's that are of the most importance of those ones that I listed? Who and what? Who is the data about? Now, there's actually there's been a lot of instances where we can go into all kinds of different things, but I just want to point out for one example, women, especially women of color, often found that, mostly women, that a lot of the studies in past never really applied to them. That the female anatomy is often different, and the reason why a lot of this happened is because most of the studies were always done on white males, especially back in the past. This is just one instance where understanding who the data was about. Oh, okay, this data was about white males. Does that apply to me? You would have to ask that question. There's more to the story, of course, in terms of what did and what didn't apply. But this was a big issue. Who? If the data was talking to you, and it turns out that the data is talking to you about bears or mice, just because it works for mice doesn't mean it will work for you. And this is sometimes what we do, and we try to make sure that they go to human trials and stuff like that, which is what they're trying to do with the vaccine. So who is this collected from? And what is the data collected? We also refer to this as the variable. So did I collect? So when we talk about the variables, there are two types of variables that we will study within this course. Okay, two types of data, and how, based on what type of data that we are looking at, we might do certain statistical methods to investigate them as such. These two variables, the first variable is what? That's the second one. I wanted that to be the second one. Quantitative. And what was the other one? No. There were no mention in the book of that word. What is it? Categorical. So we have categorical and quantitative. Categorical are when the responses are choices that can be grouped. What is the color of your eyes? Okay, that's categorical because blue, brown, green, other. Those are choices, and we can group those responses together in a bin. Quantitative are basically responses, or not basically, they are responses that are ordered, I'll put that, numbers. And when I say ordered, it really means that if you say one is less than two. So which door do you, do you have door number one, door number two, door number three? Which door do you choose? Well, your response would be, I choose door two. Is that quantitative or categorical? It's categorical because you're making a choice amongst grouping. So like, oh, I can choose towards two. Door two is not one more greater than door one, and door three isn't one more greater than door two. So it's categorical. The other way you should also be able to recognize quantitative is if they have what? What also must quantitative variables have, and what should we always be able to include about quantitative variables? What do they also include? What do quantitative variables also include? If I said I am 5.
They include units.
They include units. Perfect. And these units are a must to include. Important, but not always specified. Included. Okay? Why? Why was the data collected? And the reason why this is important is because we can ask ourselves, is there a potentiality for bias? Is there a specific reason this person, because there's a lot of things we'll talk about in regards to randomness. Now, what I mean by that is you can do something. Have you ever done those whole things like, if you want, I mean, a lot of you are watching those TikTok videos where they're doing some crazy things and it happens, the throwing the basketball, into a shot that's 100 feet away off a moving train and all that stuff. Why are they doing that? Because they want to have a lot of views. They want to show up a perfectly done one. And what is not shown, and what you should always be asking, is because you know that, why they're doing that, you can ask, well, was that their first shot then? No, that was like their 500th attempt at doing it. But all you saw was that one time that it did work. When? Now, this is also a little bit trickier. When was the data collected? Now, this is not when presented, and that's going to be the one that's going to confuse you probably the most in your homework. you'll find out that like, oh, I presented it today. I presented this material, so you'll say, oh, when was that material? It's from today. But the material was actually about something that occurred 100 years ago. So even though it might be in a journal, that the journal itself came out this month, the data itself might come from a different time period. We might be talking about temperatures, and I might say um, it was 50 degrees outside. You know, okay, the average temperature was 50 degrees. Okay, and you might be like, okay. And if I told you that, what would you say? What would be your response about that data? That if the average temperature was 50 degrees. What do you think about that? The average temperature for the month was 50 degrees. Would you say that's cold? Would you say that's hot? Yeah, where are we talking about? So if I told you that we were in Southern California, is that hot? Is that cold?
How and when?
And well, how it's just the temperature there. But how it's collected, is a very important piece. But that goes beyond our expertise, probably on this case. But it also happened in summer. If I told you it happened in summer in California, you would be like, "Whoa!" And there's the there's the when. So if I say when, if I told you it was 50 degrees and it was summertime, I meant to say summer, not that California. Summer, you would be like, "Oh, that's very cold." But if I told you it was winter, you'd be like, "Oh, that's very hot. That's a very warm winter." So when, which also leads me to where. And this is what I meant by California versus, something might seem unusual on the East Coast or inside Boston, but inside someplace else it might not be. So where was the data collected? Now, this also, this is important. Is it different in different places? I mentioned this because there's a homework problem. If we're talking about McDonald's, for example, if I told you information about a McDonald's food, is it really that important about where it was? Probably not, because most all McDonald's are going to be the same no matter where you are. So the where is not really as important or needed or applicable in that type of question. And finally, the hardest one that we'll spend even a lot more time on is how. And this has its own unit. So you really won't know how. The hows, won't always apply, but how were the who selected, and how was the what collected. So those are two very important pieces of information as well. The how, but like I said, it's going to have our own unit in our course. How they were, how and how where, how were, and how was. These are two very important questions that have their own type of things, and these lead to a lot of things called bias. If we don't select the who a proper way, our data could be very misleading. If we don't collect the data a proper way, we can also lead to misleading information. And especially during these election times, that is very, very, very true in terms of what's happening. They give you this data and they're saying like 80% of people are in favor of Trump. Well, who was it? Well, these were all people who belong to, ilovetrump.com, that are registered voters registered participants on ilovetrump.com. What was collected? Well, we sent out an email to the participants and they responded voluntarily. Well, that's very troublesome because people were self-selecting themselves into in terms of what was being collected. So there's a lot of issues that can go on. Now,
Mr. G.
yeah.
Before this is Kevin, I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, are there any laws protecting biased statistics? Because I feel like, in a way, it could be like fraud. Like, let's say if I ask certain people from a specific area, oh, do you guys do this? And it's like totally beneficial to them or to the people in that neighborhood. And then you ask another group of people in another neighborhood the same thing, and then they don't really have like the same presences or everything.
If there are implications that could negatively impact and respond to them, there are indeed specific laws, or watchdog groups, as we will sometimes call them. But this is definitely some of the stuff that's happened, like with the votings and why you need to vote in terms of the election. The scientific community, they say, like, they will not produce a vaccination until everything has been done with the process that should be scientific. But then you have other individuals that are going to try to push everything through. So, like I said, it could work. You could do something, and you could take that 100-foot basketball shot off of a moving train the first time, and it goes in and it works. But that's not, the chances of that happening is very slim. And there are laws that do get passed that you can't present information that is incorrect. But a lot of people, once again, it goes by bias. A lot of people don't understand things like financial literacy or statistics, and so they only present them with enough information to make the conclusion that they'll make. And smart people know that other people who don't understand it are going to not realize what they're really saying. And this is something that's true, like I said. If you're not educated, especially when it comes to financial literacy and statistics, you can be taken advantage of. And if you have that power and knowledge in these type of contexts, you hold the power. You're welcome. When identifying the who, make sure to include the number if known. So I asked students. Well, how many students, right? I asked 20 students. Okay, that's a better idea. I asked 20 students from BCLA. Okay, that's good information. I asked 20 students from my BCLA AP Stats class. Okay, now that really tells me who. Now you can always be more specific, and the more specific, if your sample is more specific, it's very important, because who does that apply to? If I took the average grade or GPA of this class, and then I say, oh, I studied 20 students at BCLA for their GPA, and this is what I found, blah blah blah. It might be very misleading, because those 20 students were AP students, which typically have higher GPAs. So understanding who can inform you if there's possible potential bias. And we'll have a whole unit on bias. And some information may not be given. So N.S for your homework equals not specified. So you can write the word not specified. You can write NS if you wish to. The goal in your homework is just to do your best in trying to identify. You're going to get little readings of data, about some data. And the question that you're going to answer, and these are for the majority of the questions. The very first two questions in your homework tonight literally just ask you what type of variable. Categorical, quantitative. Don't go into trying to do all the W's. Then the next questions ask you more. So your homework, number 1, comes from chapter 2, and it's problems 2, 4, 14, 16, 18, and 20.